How's everyone doing? Is it good to get outside and feel that warm San Francisco sunshine? Nice and surprising. So I'm Karen Catlin, and I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about the backstory to how I became an advocate for inclusive workplaces. And along the way, I'll tell you a little bit about my background as well. Plenty of seats in the front, my friends who are coming in. So this is my second career, as I like to say, career 2.0. Career 1.0 was in tech. I worked for 25 years in tech, and hello, Heidi, we worked together for a lot of those years. I started out as a software engineer, and then over time moved into program management roles, people management roles, and eventually into executive leadership. And most recently, I was a vice president of engineering at Adobe. And during that 25 years working in tech, I noticed a decline happening in gender diversity in the industry. I noticed it firsthand. And some people younger than me may not realize this, but when I started my career a long, long time ago, there used to be more women getting technical degrees, getting computer science degrees. And when I started working, there were a lot of women that were working side by side in the offices, workspaces, in my meetings. And it went down over that 25 years. Now, while I was still at Adobe, I decided, as the most senior woman on the engineering side, I probably had a role to play. A role in creating a more inclusive workplace, and I was focused primarily on women, I must admit. But I started our women's ERG, our employee resource group. I started mentoring a lot of women, and I started just being an advocate for women in the various executive meetings I was in and looking out for making sure women could be successful and grow their careers at Adobe. And I loved doing that so much that, I'm just gonna move on to the next slide, loved doing that so much that I, about 7 years ago, decided to start my own business. So I could help women not just at Adobe, but across the industry. And I became a leadership coach. And I love leadership coaching. I do a lot of that today. That's my primary business. But I soon realized I had a problem. Because even if I were like the most amazing leadership coach on the planet, which I don't think I am, I'm still working towards that, even if I were, and even if I were helping my clients, really lean into their careers, thank you, Sheryl Sandberg, they still were facing an uphill battle. They were facing an uphill battle because working in tech means that primarily the closer you get to the C-suite, the maler and paler it gets. So I started realizing, oh my gosh, there's something more I need to do. I need to advocate for women and every other underrepresented person who's out there who is not part of that male pale majority, frankly. And by the way, for the male and pale in the room, I'm dude friendly. I'm white myself, so please don't run away. This is not about shaming and blaming. It's just about talking and raising awareness. So I decided, oh my gosh, do people just not even realize about the challenges that people from underrepresented groups face in the workplace? Do they not even understand what is going on in our workplace? Are they just not seeing it? So I decided I was going to change the world. I was going to make tech inclusive, all of tech. And of course, what's the first thing anyone does these days when they want to change the world? You start a Twitter handle. So I started the Twitter handle @BetterAllies almost 5 years ago now. I can't believe it. And I really started just tweeting these everyday, simple actions I thought people could take to be more inclusive in their workplaces. Things like, I pledge to not speak on all male panels, for example. Or, I notice when interruptions happen in meetings and redirect the conversation back to the person who's interrupted. Things I think are just sort of simple. And I used a first-person voice, I. It's very much an aspirational first person. I do this. I pledge to do this. I'm willing to do this. I'm going to try this. And it was kind of me pretending to be a man on Twitter, I have to admit. It was really powerful, and it gave me actually a lot of confidence to be sharing these ideas that I really wanted men out there to be doing. Well, this little Twitter handle started growing in popularity. It started growing in popularity in terms of people would find it and then tag 5 of their friends. I just found Better Allies. You have to follow them, which is cool. It also started growing in popularity because people would start sending me information. It's like, have you thought about this? Have you seen this research study? Have you seen this news report? Like, I don't know, a couple years ago when Travis Kalanick was still CEO of Uber, there was a lot of news reports coming out. But one of them was that he was using the nursing mother's room as his personal phone booth. You're shaking your head. You remember this one. So, of course, someone flags that for me, and I go out to Twitter, and I'm like, tweeting, like, I pledge not to use the nursing mother's room for my personal phone calls, period, unlike at Travis. You're like, kind of dig it to him. So I had some fun with that. But people started sending me ideas. And literally, I just curate. I curate these ideas about how to be more inclusive based on the media, the research that's done by great social scientists, and my personal experience. And I started getting speaking engagements. This Twitter handle was anonymous for a long time, but I started getting speaking engagements. People would DM this Twitter handle and say, hey, anyone at your initiative do any public speaking? And I'm like, my initiative? Yeah, it's me. Like, it's anyone out there? I'm like, yeah. So I would DM back and I said, yes, I'll put you in touch with someone. And because I wanted to stay anonymous. So then I would go over to my personal email and write to the person and say, hey, I'm Karen, I work on Better Allies. I think I always was very careful. I contribute to Better Allies, and I love public speaking. What do you have in mind? So I started getting speaking engagements to share this whole approach of everyday actions. And every time I spoke during the Q&A, someone would say, hey, Karen, do you have a book? And I'd be like, no, I don't have a book. No, I don't have a book. Well, I finally wrote the darn book. I published it in January. It's called Better Allies, Everyday Actions to Create Inclusive, Engaging Workplaces. And I'm so thrilled to be here today to share this approach with you, the Better Allies approach. And it's definitely going to be a workshop. So you're hearing me talk a lot now, but we will get some audience engagement. We've got runners with the mics in the back, too. So to start off with this workshop, I want you all to just take a minute and think about a time in your past when you acted as an ally, however you define that, or a time when you really needed an ally to step up and do something on your behalf. So take a minute, and I would love just 3 volunteers to share either their answer to either of these. Plenty of room in the front. Promise. It's fine to come on up. We're taking a little break now thinking about our answers. But if you want to volunteer to share a time you acted as an ally or a time you really needed an ally, please raise your hand. This is being recorded, and also the transcript is happening, so we need to have everyone speak into the mic. Right in the back. Thank you. That's our number 1. I'm going to take 3 of these. Go ahead.
So this was interesting because it was actually, I'm on the steering committee for an ERG, and there was someone on there who, when I was trying to speak, continued to interrupt me. And it's hard for me to stand up and feel like I'm being mean by insisting that someone listen to me. And I still did that. I said, let me finish, and he still continued to interrupt me. And so there were multiple people. We're obviously in an ERG, so multiple people, they stood up for me, right? And so that was just really helpful to have people around me who helped.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, when we try to advocate on our own behalf at times, we can come across as seeming incredibly forward, incredibly strict, incredibly the B word. And so it's certainly helpful when other people can stand up on our behalf to just hey, that's not cool. Let's not do that. Thank you for sharing that. And because you shared it, you get a copy of my book.
I do.
As I said, 3 volunteers total. I have 3 books. Who is going to be number 2 who wants to share a story and win a copy of a book? Okay, we've got the next 2 both here. First, this gentleman here, and then you're next. Thank you. Go ahead.
My best friend is trans feminine, meaning they present as male but identify as a trans woman, and so lots of times they are constantly referred to as he, and so I don't just shame other people who say that. I just redirect it and say, well, she's really interested in this. I think she's really going to be a success when she does this, as a way to help them come out to other people without having them have to say that and correct people all the time.
Wonderful example of being an ally, reinforcing the pronouns someone wants to use and making sure, and again, I love your approach. You're not going to shame and blame someone around you. You're just going to start using the right pronoun and potentially try to find some language so you can use it a couple times. It sounds like the example you just gave. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, here's your book, and then here in the, I'll take it. Yeah. Thank you very much, and I'll take that, and then number 3. Thank you.
Do you want me to stand?
If you'd like.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jo Clar, and I used to work at an organization called Year Up, and I believe one of the executives actually speaking on the panel later this afternoon, Jay Banfield. And part of my role was to, we're a workforce development nonprofit, and part of my role was to support an internship program. We work with 18 and 24-year-olds. We say underprivileged adults who don't always have access to opportunity. Many of you might be partners with Year Up. And so I was at this meeting, executive meeting, along with one of the major financial institution, our partners, and we had a cybersecurity intern there that had some performance issues. And how I served as an ally to both, not just Year Up, along with my intern and that our partner, was by just like also speaking direct and speaking the truth, was that it was unfair for that manager to truly compare my intern, who was just 6 months ago assistant general manager at a grocery outlet, to a Harvard graduate. So he just appreciated me being direct and just speak the truth. So that's how I served as an ally in that situation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And here's your copy of the book as well. And then if you don't mind giving Nisha the microphone. And that's a great example of making sure that people are given feedback that's appropriate, and you were moderating that potentially and advocating, but also making sure that people were getting, being objectively reviewed for the position they have and what their skills are. Love that story. Thank you for sharing. I'm sure all of you have many more, but we're going to move on so that we can cover a lot of ground. But now that we're all thinking about some of the roles allies can play, what I'm going to do in this workshop is cover 3 topics from my book that I think will be relevant to most people here as we think about our workplaces. The first is what happens in our meetings. That's going to be our first topic. That's not always inclusive and what we can do about it. The second is giving feedback. And this builds on a little bit about what number 3 here was saying, and giving feedback, and especially what I call the dreaded tissue box, and how that holds us back from giving constructive career-building feedback. And then the third is office housework. And if you do not know what that term is right now, don't worry, you will by the end. So let's dive into this first topic, what happens in our meetings. I'm going to go through some examples of non-inclusive behavior in meetings, and we'll just get into this. So the first one, interruptions. Okay, so this is a picture of the Supreme Court of the United States. And a few years ago, a researcher studied the transcripts of 12 years of Supreme Court United States hearings, their discussions. And they found that the female justices were interrupted on average 3 times more than the male justices. And they only did the interruptions themselves, the women, 4% of the time, okay? And I don't know what it is about interruptions, why men interrupt women more often than the other way around. It may be that men, your vocal cords are actually longer, making your voices deeper, more resonant, easier to project into a conversation. It's easier to interrupt with a deeper voice. It may be that it's just more culturally acceptable for men to interrupt women, not the other way around. And it may be that we women use qualifiers when we speak that make it easy for us to interrupt. I'm seeing some head shake. Things like, hey, Nisha, Holly, excuse me. Do you mind if I say something here? Because I kind of have an important point. Would that be okay? It's just like we use these filler words, these qualifiers. But regardless of the reason, and regardless if you're in DC or in tech, interruptions are a thing, and they're not very inclusive at all. Second is idea hijacking. And here's another example from Washington, D.C. This is a picture of President Obama when he was still in office. And it came out that his female staffers had to adopt a strategy they called amplification. Amplification works like this. When one of the female staffers said something, like Hillary, we'll just say Hillary says something, another female staffer would chime in and say, Hillary, that's a great idea, and here's how my department can contribute to the next steps. Okay? Amplify the idea, give the originator the credit. And they had to do this because they found that men around the table were hijacking their ideas and claiming them as their own. Okay. We're going to do a quick poll here. For people, and I am going to do it just based on a binary gender, which I realize gender is not binary, but just for the sake of simplifying this exercise. For people in the room who are men, would you raise your hand if this has happened to you? Where you've said something in a meeting and it didn't really go anywhere, and then someone said it in the same meeting and got the credit? I'm seeing 2 hands, maybe 3 hands, a few more coming up. So we'll call it 5 hands just went up. And roughly, I think we might, just based on visuals, might have 50-50 gender ratio in this room. Okay, women, so people who are women in the audience, how many of you have had this happen to you where, oh my gosh, turn around if you're in the front, okay. Whoa, so 5 men, and I can't count that high, women. So thank you. So it's a thing, not just again in DC, but we have a comment in the back. Yes, sure, happy to have a comment. Yes, thank you.
I was going to say that in addition to that, I and myself and other colleagues, we find ourselves coming up with ideas or figuring out ways to say things so that it's their idea, which means that they will be more inclined to implement or take it into account. So you kind of have to reverse the strategy of, well, really, you're just kind of accepting the fact that if you say it, no, they're not going to be interested in it. But if you bring it to them as their idea, then they will, in fact, say, oh, yeah, that's you know what, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And that's another strategy for actually getting things done.
Yep. So thank you for sharing that. And I find that so frustrating, but understandable. I think I've been in those shoes before myself. And it's frustrating to me because I don't want to fix women. I don't want to fix people from underrepresented groups here. I want to fix the majority, fix the status quo. And so I so appreciate you sharing that. And I think if it's working for you, awesome. But
Not something I do all the time, but I'm just saying.
yep, not something you do all the time, but you sometimes have to. It's the right strategy. I'm talking over you just for the person who is doing the recording and everything. Thank you for sharing that. So let's move on to another thing that happens in meetings. And this is what is called unconscious demotions. It's a term I learned from Suzanne Wertheim, who maybe some of you know. An unconscious demotion is when someone doesn't look the part, and as a result, we demote them to what we think the role is. Unconscious demotion looks like this. It looks like a very young-looking professor showing up for the very first day of classes. You've seen this, yes. And basically being directed to the grad student offices, not to her professor offices, because she just doesn't look the part. Or it looks like this. I was talking to a man who wears a turban, and he's a software engineer. And he told me every time he's at a networking event at a conference, the cocktail hour after the rest of the conference is done, the technical conference he's attending, people come up to him, it happens, and say, hey, we ran out of crackers over on the cheese board. Could you refill it? Okay, that's an unconscious demotion from being a qualified member to be at that conference, a qualified participant, to a member of the catering staff. Okay. And it looks like this, too. For people who are in the room here for Lisa's talk at 11, I shared this a little bit, but I'll just share it again. This happened to me just a year or two ago. I was here in San Francisco visiting my partner, Tim, at his work, and he said, hey, Karen, my friend Steve wants to meet you. So we walk over to Steve's desk, and Steve stands up, and he says, Karen, so good to meet you. Hey, so I hear you used to work at Adobe. Did you work in HR or in marketing? Okay, and there's nothing wrong with HR or marketing. I really want to emphasize that. But when you're you have a technical background, you were filling a technical role as a VP of engineering, and someone just assumes you couldn't have possibly done that job, right? That's another unconscious demotion. So look out for that, especially in our meetings when we're meeting new people, not necessarily the colleagues that we've been working with for a long time. So my message is everyday practical actions, and I know some people came to specifically get those. So here are the first set of everyday actions you all can take to be more inclusive in your meetings. The first is look out for interruptions and stop them in their tracks. All it takes is a simple, hey, I'd like to hear Emma finish her thought, and redirect the conversation. A second thing to do is cultivate cultures of credit in the meetings. Saying something, and this helps with that, the idea hijacking, saying something like, hey, I see you agree with the point Willie made earlier in the meeting. I like the way you built on Willie's idea, that kind of culture of credit. Or look for opportunities to say things for underrepresented people in your workforce. Hey, you know, what I learned from Anna is the following. Side note on this last one, this happened to me, and it was like the best day ever. I had recently joined Adobe, and my boss was a senior vice president of engineering. And we were in an engineering leadership meeting, and I heard him say this. He's like, well, what I learned from Karen is, and then he filled in something. And what he went on to say was nothing I had ever said myself, like exactly. It was similar to something I'd shared with him in a one-on-one. But he had taken what I'd shared with him and recast it in the strategic language of this new company I had joined. So I learned how to be more effective because of his role modeling, basically. Giving me a shout out too in front of all my peers that this incredibly esteemed senior vice president learned something from me made me feel good, and I think it built my credibility. So it's a great thing to do for people that you work with as well. And last but not least, when you meet someone, please ask just an open-ended question, like, what do you do for a living? Or what do you do here at this company, or whatever like that. Ask an open-ended question, super easy, as opposed to giving them an unconscious demotion to what you think they look like. So I'm going to take a pause here and ask what you would add to this list. Are there things you've done to being more inclusive in meetings that you'd like to share? Or some ideas of like things that, well, I wish that people would do this. I wish people would act as allies. Okay, we have someone here, and the mic's just coming, so give it just a sec.
Just making sure you hold space for people who might not feel comfortable speaking up while conversation's happening, so you actually ensure that you've heard from everyone on purpose so that one voice doesn't dominate.
Love that. So making sure everyone has a voice. And I'll say I love that, and I also proceed with caution on that one. People who are quiet, more introverted, need to really spend time with their thoughts before speaking up. One of the worst things you can do is call them out and say, hey, we haven't heard from you, what do you think? So making sure you do this with respect and say something more open-ended, like, is there anyone here who hasn't spoken yet who'd like a turn? Something like that.
Yeah,
so
that's more what I was
thank you.
referring
Yeah, so
to.
I'm taking your point and hopefully turning it into a learning moment. Please, we got it here, and then we'll go over here.
Yeah, we had a situation. We have one guy on our team who's just very talkative and assertive, and he's great, and everybody likes him, and he's knowledgeable. But there's a lot of women on the team. And we noticed a pattern over a series of meetings that every time they asked for questions or there was a lull, he would jump in. And we said to him, you know, like, it's not that you don't have anything good to say. And he understood, and we had a good relationship. He was very sweet about it. But we said, how about just wait 2 more beats? Because there are people who will talk, they're just not quite as ready to jump in.
Love that.
And so he just left a little space. But he took that feedback, and it sort of changed the culture of those calls.
Beautiful. What a great example. Some people just aren't aware of how they are showing up or how they could be perceived. And so I love that example of no shame, no blame. Do you know this is happening? Could you just take 2 beats? I love that. Over here, yes.
Yeah, to build up on what she said, we could make that a little more effective by if there's a pattern, like if it's team meetings, for example, and you always know you're going to go around asking people, then people expect that. And in addition to that, if you send like the meeting agenda beforehand, people can come more prepared, and especially people who are more shy of speaking. So a couple of these things along with that then can make it.
Yeah. So yeah, share that agenda ahead of time, give people time to think about what they're going to say, and know that it's going to go around the room. Everyone's going to have a chance to talk. Thank you. Was there another hand in the front? Nope, same thing. Okay, here.
I read, I think, a New York Times article about amplification a few years ago, and so it's been something that I've been using a lot. And one thing that I like to do with it is to use it for artifacts. So not just for conversations around a table. So I'm a designer. We produce like design patterns that are used throughout the UI. So when I make a suggestion to someone, maybe you should use this pattern that Emily created a few weeks ago. It's really useful. I've used it. I think it's great. So just attributing things to people.
Love that. So not even necessarily right in the moment, in the meeting, but after the fact as someone's work is being reused or leveraged in some way. Love that. Over here.
Yeah, just building off the stop interruptions, something that I found to be particularly useful for me is the power of body language, particularly eye contact. I find that if you see somebody else is interrupting, keep your eye focused on the person that was already speaking. And I feel like that's a great deterrent for the person who's interrupting to realize they're not getting the attention. Because people tend to turn to the interrupter, and then all of a sudden, he or she was taken there.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So simple. Keep your eyes on the person who was interrupted. Thank you for sharing that. One more in the back, and then we'll move on to our next topic. But my friend Heidi.
So just a thought about how to build up habits. I've seen companies have something where you have the equivalent of a microphone, like whoever's holding the potato gets to speak, and if you're not holding the potato, you can't talk. And so it's a way to build up a habit if you're not yet in the habit of being respectful to people's time.
Love that. How many people have a potato or a rubber chicken or whatever? A few. I love that idea. Thank you. Thank you. So as you can see, there are ways, once you're aware of things that happen in meetings that aren't inclusive, to take action. Let's move on to the second topic, which is feedback, giving constructive feedback. Now, I'm going to cover feedback for both people who are people managers who have to give feedback to their employees so that they grow in their careers and all of that. But also, if you're not a people manager, this also applies to peer feedback, people you work with that you might want to give feedback to. And the feedback, there's research from Stanford's Clayman Institute on gender research, and they did research looking at the gendered differences in how women and men get feedback. They did this research by studying, I think it was over like 4,000 reviews from 3 large tech companies and a professional services company here in the area. So they actually analyzed written performance reviews, annual performance reviews, and they found that women got less feedback tied to the business outcomes, okay, and shorter reviews. I'll give you an example of what this means in just a minute. By contrast, men were offered a clearer idea of how to get to the next level, what they're doing that is really working well and they should keep doing, and what new skills should they learn. So what does this look like in a performance review? A woman might get the feedback, people like working with you. Well, that's nice, really awesome. Let's look at what a man's feedback might look like. You are effective at building team consensus. You successfully resolve which features to prioritize in our last sprint, leading us to ship the product on time. Yeah. Come on in the front. There's 2 seats, plenty of room. Happy to have you come. No worries. So this is the kind of feedback, like if men are getting this feedback that's so much more constructive and helpful, they're going to be growing their careers. They're going to know what to do to keep growing their careers and have the impact they want to have. And frankly, this is going to be more kind of valued at their company. And there's another research study. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead. We'll get to that research study in just a second. But I'd love to have you all raise your hand if you agree with this statement. I seldom hold back from giving difficult feedback. Just raise your hand if you agree. Okay, roughly I'm looking at like 10% of the room, okay? That's pretty small. There was a research study, there we go, that was done by McKinsey and Lean In that found that 66% of managers say they seldom hesitate to give difficult feedback. So I've heard the DE&I, whatever community is really nice. So I think that we're seeing that like play out right in this room. If only 10% of you compared to the sample that was surveyed, which was 66%. But I think a lot of us hesitate from giving difficult feedback because of what I call the dreaded tissue box. We don't want someone to cry or have their feelings hurt by giving difficult feedback. And frankly, it's easier just to like not even bother, right? So this research study that I'm talking about from McKinsey and Lean In started looking at like, well, why don't people give difficult feedback? And is it different if they're a man or a woman thinking about giving the difficult feedback? And there's a bunch of stuff. I know this is kind of a busy slide, but they focused on like, well, some people are concerned about the emotional breakdown, the tissue box. Definitely that's the case, and more concerned that women are going to need that tissue box than men. They're also found that managers are concerned they'll seem biased or prejudiced. Don't want them to think I'm biased, and that's why I'm giving them the feedback. Concerned about an outburst, which I think is more physical, like hitting something, kicking a wall. I don't want them to dislike me, because it's all about me. and concerned about seeming mean or hurtful as I deliver this. All of that's good, but I really was interested in this second one. I don't give difficult feedback because I'm concerned I'll seem biased or prejudiced. And it turns out that this is a huge thing. This means that men are going to hold back from giving difficult feedback to women because I don't want them to think I'm sexist, and that's why I'm picking on them, right? It means that someone who's white might not give constructive career-growing feedback to someone of color because I don't want them to think I'm biased. It means if I have a university degree, I might not give that really constructive, helpful feedback to a boot camp grad because, hey, I don't want them to think I'm prejudiced against boot camp grads, right? Regardless of the reason, though, we need to understand this is the case, and we need to check our biases and give that constructive feedback to everybody. So our second set of everyday actions that I promised you, and this one around giving feedback, is focus on the impact of people's work as you're giving them feedback, what they should keep doing because it's really working well, and what they could improve on. Second is suggest new skills to learn so they have an even bigger impact. And this was part of that Stanford Clayman Institute study, is women just aren't even learning that they need to build these new skills and how that would have a bigger impact, whereas the men are. The third is please give the direct feedback. Don't ease up because you want to avoid hurt feelings or this feeling that it's all about you and you might come across as seeming biased or prejudiced. And last but not least, write reviews of the same length, please. Again, from the Stanford study, women got much shorter feedback reviews, so that meant they weren't getting as much feedback. A quick side note on this last one. I was giving a similar talk at last year's AWS reInvent conference, their huge annual conference in Las Vegas. And you know at those big conferences, you'll have to fill out surveys. Maybe that's done here too, I don't even know. But you fill out surveys on the speakers. And so a couple weeks after the event, I got my feedback. And one of the people responding said, Karen, I heard what you said and that we should give feedback of equal length to everybody. So that's what I'm doing with my speaker reviews for AWS. I'm like, all right, one person was listening to me. That's awesome. So again, I'll take a pause here and ask you what you think about this. What have you maybe done as allies to make sure that you're giving equal and effective feedback above and beyond what I've shared, or some challenges that you want allies to help you with? Any thoughts in the back? And then number 2 will be up here. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think giving direct feedback, even if it's hard to give, is really important. Shortly after I started at a company I work at a couple years ago, there was somebody who started shortly after I did, and she was somebody who people in the office were a bit concerned about her because she was like not coming in at the most appropriate time. She was using lunchtime to go to gym in the office gym, things that people were kind of like being, oh, I can't believe she's doing that. Oh, I can't believe she's doing that. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, like, why is nobody telling her to stop doing that? And just like let her know, like, there are expectations that she isn't following. Clearly nobody communicated to her. And I'm like, someone needs to step in and tell her. So like during a lunch break, I just spoke to her privately and let her know that, like, oh, maybe she shouldn't be doing this and that, and you know what, in a constructive way to like just let her know that like there's certain ways, certain expectations in the office that like clearly she hadn't been informed. Now I'm just doing what I can to help her out.
Thank you. And the poor thing, otherwise she would never have known because she wasn't aware. And so she needed someone like that to actually just pull her aside and say, hey, this isn't working. You know, the unwritten rules of the game of working here are this. We didn't even think of telling you because it just hadn't come up before or something like that. Thank you. And I love that you took her aside in private and did that. That's such a great way to give constructive feedback. Thank you. And then in the third row here. Thank you, Nisha.
I like what you touched on about, like, you know, kind of folks in the D&I space wanting to be seen as a kind person. So I have the hard conversation with myself every time that I do feel that hesitation, like, if I don't give this feedback, that is unkind of me, because withholding it is not a kindness. Right. Yeah.
I love that. So yeah, holding back from giving this feedback is really the opposite of kind.
Yeah.
It really
so
can be hurtful.
You can take that moment, but then still move forward.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
So I'm right behind you, so I'll just hand it.
Okay, here, and then way in the back after you. Go ahead.
I was working with a senior leader abroad, and in our one-on-ones, he's former military, he would come a little bit closer because it was just the style from, I guess, military time of, okay, I'm trying to get all of this information. And I told him, well, actually, when you do that, it makes me close up a little bit, and you're not getting the info as readily as I want to give it to you. And he wasn't aware that he was doing it. So
example,
just
yeah.
calling out actions that people may not be aware of.
Thank you for sharing that, and good for you for advocating for yourself and like claiming that space. And then we're going to go all the way in the back.
For me, in my experience, it's been really useful to have clear expectations from the outset of people and teams, etc. And then also having a clear rubric as well, so that way, and not talking about points, but I'm talking about like on a graded scale, maybe of like 1 to 5, the expectations, and this is maybe below expectation, this meets expectation, this perhaps exceeds expectations, and then that way, it kind of touches on all of those points,
Yes.
and one's able to have, reviews of the same length, et cetera, and then equitable performance reviews, essentially.
Yeah, so it becomes equitable and it's objective. It's not
Right.
subjective. If you're taking that ability to be kind of subjective out of it, the more that you can have that rubric that everyone's following, everyone's getting measured against. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Okay, and then that will be the last one, but please go ahead.
For sure. I think it's interesting when thinking about feedback, and I didn't know just how powerful it is when, in most environments, I haven't had leadership that looks like me. I'm a black woman, in case y'all don't know what I look like back here. And it was powerful when I finally had a CEO boss, who was a woman of color, give me feedback. And just the way that shifted my understanding of what reality actually is and what the standard is based on that perspective changed everything. Having had mostly white men give me feedback and still kind of questioning, like, well, is this from like that specific lens? And do I need to hold myself to a standard that is skewed towards the white male perspective? And so it was actually powerful when I finally had someone who looked like me give me feedback, and it kind of shifted my understanding of what that could be about within a professional context.
Thank you. That's super powerful. And again, I get frustrated because we don't always have that ability to get feedback from someone who looks like us. But look how powerful it can be. And so, so thank you for sharing that, definitely. One last thing I'm going to say, really to put some emphasis on this, is focusing on the impact. A quick story here. I was coaching a woman, engineering manager here in San Francisco, and it was annual performance review time at her company. And so she was talking to me, she said, Karen, I know it's this performance review time, I know it's going to be a lot of work. I have 9 direct reports, I have to write 9 reviews. I know that's going to be a lot of work, but I'm committed to it, it's fine. But I also got requests for 25 360s. So 360s being some, people around the organization asked her to contribute to their performance review because she had seen them work. 25, Karen, I don't know how I'm going to do that. And so I said, how about if you focus just on one thing they could do to have a bigger impact on the project, on whatever, on the company, on the bottom line, just one thing. And don't worry about giving them all the feedback in the world that you could think of. She's like, okay, I'll give it a try. Well, next time we talked, she said, Karen, that was actually pretty easy. It was easy to come up with one thing that each one of those people could do to have a bigger impact, and it felt like a really great way to give them feedback. And she said, and what's cool is our VP, like my grand boss, my boss's boss, my grand boss was reviewing, kind of dipping in and looking at the 360 feedback so he could get a sense of the organization. And he gave me feedback that I wrote the best 360 reviews. So anyway, a little tip there about focusing on that impact and maybe just one thing that they could do to have a bigger impact. Let's move on to office housework. Okay, who wants to just shout out, and I will repeat it because we don't have to run, but who wants to shout out an example of office housework? Taking notes. Taking notes. When it's not your job, I'll just add, when it's not your job. Go ahead. Planning a party. Planning a party. What was over here? Louder? Making coffee. Making coffee. Doing the dishes. Coordinating schedules. Coordinating supplies. What was over here? Ordering birthday cakes. Thank you. Yes, these are all examples of office housework when it's not your job. Like if you are an administrative assistant and part of your job description is order the monthly birthday cake, that's fine. That's not office housework. It's when it's not your job. Now, again, this is just a generalization, but all the voices who just shouted things out, in my mind, were feminine. Did anyone else notice that? Yep, some other people are, yep. Guess what? This stuff often more frequently falls on women's shoulders, and that's why we're kind of sensitive to this. And speaking of taking the minutes and this gender divide, I'll call it, I was doing a consulting project for a company in the South Bay here, a tech company, and my job as a consultant for this particular gig was to help the Women in Tech, I think is what it's called, the Women in Tech Planning Committee come up with a strategic plan for the year. Instead of just like, we're just going to do a bunch of things, actually have a strategy behind what they were trying to achieve. So I attended a monthly meeting that this steering committee had, the planning committee, and this committee meeting had been happening for a couple months already, and they had decided to have a rotating responsibility for who would take the minutes, because it was no one's job, but it had to get done. And the meeting I was at, it turned out that it was Brian's turn. Okay, Brian was the one male ally on this Women in Tech steering committee. And can't make this stuff up, I swear. Brian said, when it was announced, like, oh, Brian, it's your turn to take the minutes, Brian said, oh, I'm not really good at taking minutes. I think someone else should do it. And oh my gosh, how many of you have those days when like you're reflecting on your day, like on your commute home or like falling asleep at night and you think of the perfect thing to say then that you wish you had said? Yeah. Well, good news, folks. That day I thought of the perfect thing to say right then and there. And I said to Brian, I said, hey, Brian, practice makes perfect. And this is the perfect place to practice. Because I was not going to let the one guy get out of his fair share of doing the office housework. Okay, so I mentioned women tend to do more of this than men. This number, 47%, almost half of women surveyed in something called the Elephant in the Valley survey, which was run a few years ago. Thousands of women across tech were surveyed. Almost half of them said that they were asked to do these lower level tasks that their male colleagues just weren't even asked to do. And according to UC Berkeley, I think it's the Hastings School, they did some research. Women of color are tasked with even more housework than their white colleagues. And forget about even, this is like asking women or women of color to do this work. Forget about the times we just volunteer, because it's like, oh my gosh, no one's going to volunteer to just order the darn cake. I'll just get it done, right? Yep. And to go kind of complete this, there are a lot of examples of this that are administrative in nature. And again, if you're an administrative assistant and this is your job, it's not office housework, that's your job. But it is things like taking notes, scheduling a meeting, ordering food, making reservations, all these things that we came up with. But it's not limited to administrative work. It's also other undervalued tasks. Things like who's going to train the interns, be the mentor for the intern. First time you're asked to do that, it's kind of an honor, like, oh, I'm going to be the mentor for the intern this summer, and I'm going to learn some management and delegation techniques. It's really a great experience. But if you're the only person being asked to do that and it's the 5th summer in a row, right, that's office housework at that point. It's undervalued. It may be things like, who's going to clean up the source code comments before we ship our software to an open source repo or to a partner or something like that? Who can clean up the source code comments? Look to a woman. Or maybe it's like, who can be on, we need someone to be on the committee or site council to order the new, like, I don't know, choose the color of the chairs that are going to be in the new cafeteria or something like that, right? There are all kinds of examples of this that need to get done for the health of an organization but are not valued and don't lead to career growth, okay? Any other, like, people dying to add something to this list here? Yeah, go ahead, shout it out and I'll repeat it. Ooh.
Hey, be a mentor or serve on the diversity committee, right?
Yes.
I don't know, I feel like there's a certain amount of guilt associated with that.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try to summarize for people who are listening and on the recording. So there's also this aspect of if you're one of the only people from an underrepresented group in your department or something, you're always the one asked to speak on the diversity panel or to be part of the D&I committee or something like that. And Or on the poster. On the poster, yes. Classic poster child, literally, right? You're the poster child. Yeah, you're going to be on the recruiting page, the careers page for the rest of your life for that company. Yeah. So hang on just a sec. So these are other examples of they're actually important, and maybe the first time you get to speak on a panel, you build up some public speaking skills and all of that, but it takes away from the task that you are being like objectively reviewed on, your OKRs, your quarterly goals or something, and that's when it becomes a problem. If it's valued though, and that's something you want to be doing, and it's career growth for you, then go for it. But when it feels like office housework, it's no fun. Over here, you want to add something?
I was going to add to that also, in some instances where you have either like the one female engineer who's like on every single interview panel, and I think that that's kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand you have this one person who's doing all the interviews constantly, but then you're also kind of projecting this bias that maybe there's like a lot of female engineers at the company when really there's just the one.
And by the way, though, if you don't do it, the female candidates aren't going to come because they don't see anyone like them there. Same with not just female, but people of color or people with different abilities and so forth, or older workers as me. So I know it's a conundrum. I don't know what to do about that, except look to make it as efficient as possible for the underrepresented people you're tapping. Like, can they be the ones who might, I don't know if this makes sense, but like take them to lunch? So, because they got to eat too, and so kind of killing two birds with one stone. I don't know. So in the back. Go ahead.
I mean, some of those experiences that people have highlighted seem to kind of smack of or reek of tokenism. So I think that's especially where allyship can come into play.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for saying that. And I know people have some more examples. I only have 3 minutes, so I'm going to run here, and we can talk more after. The impact of office housework, quickly, there's so many ways it impacts us. It creates subservient roles. People are peers, and all of a sudden one person is in service of others, so they're not seen as equals. Takes away from more important work. We touched on that. It interrupts flow as well. Flow being like an engineer who is like deep in the code, tracking down some gnarly bug, and then someone comes by to chip in their $5 or $10 for the baby gift that she's collecting money for, and she loses her flow. And of course, if we're taking minutes at the meeting, we're kind of a step behind the conversation, prevents us from making the killer points we should be making. It's kind of obvious here, I'm going to go through this quickly, but as you think about how to disrupt office housework, notice it's happening, set up those rotations for taking minutes or other things, look out for distractions or redirections you can take, such as, hey, Deep is great at mentoring, but it's the perfect stretch assignment for Nick, the new hire, or something like that. And then if you see people who are always volunteering to do different things, coach them, take them aside, give them some private feedback and say, hey, I notice you always raise your hand to organize the offsite, but it's not really leading to career growth for you. You might want to step back. Okay, so I hope that you all, thanks for sticking with me, you all feel like you have a role that you can play, whether you're part of an underrepresented group or part of the majority, to create a more inclusive workplace. And I just touched on a few things here in terms of meetings and feedback and office housework, but I have so much more in my book, so please, I would encourage you to take a look at my book if you're so inclined. You can find it on Amazon, for example. I also have a weekly newsletter I send out every Friday. Anyone here get it? 5 Ally Actions. Yay, thank you. And I share just like kind of a roundup of the news of what's going on and how you can be a better ally based on very current events. And occasionally I pull in something from my book if I only have 4 for the week or something like that. But you can get it by going to betterallies.com/gift. And also there's a downloadable packet you can get there, which includes a book club discussion guide if you want to discuss this book at your workplace. I try to make it very easy for people to do that with this guide, and a few downloadable posters. And last but not least, I'm super active on Twitter at Better Allies, so follow me there if you want, or I'm also building up on Instagram, and I'm on Medium and Pinterest as well. I'm going to stay behind. We're going to break because there's so much more going on today. I'll be up here. I have some Better Allies stickers, if anybody wants laptop stickers, and business cards if people want them. But thank you so much, everyone.